What do we need to be able to produce real food year-round? I don't like to eat just certain days. I like to eat most every day of the year. But I don't like to eat just anything either, because I want the highest efficiency nutrient production. I want more nutrients than anybody else, and I want to know how to produce the most nutrients in the least amount of time. And to do that, I'm going to be covering what I call the intensive biological food production system. Now, many people, if you ask my wife what Allan does, she'll most often tell people Allan gardens. But I can tell you that if you produce 4,000 pounds of produce off of a 12 by 36 foot space in a year's time, you're going to be doing more than gardening. You're going to be producing food, and that's what we're going to talk about. Because when you garden, you have spotty germination. You plant in that row, and sometimes that seed doesn't come up, and you have a spot in that row that there isn't anything there. You may have weed problems. Many times throughout the growing season, you'll have stressed growing conditions, and it's a challenge to get consistent good production. Most gardeners only grow one crop per year, and they generally use larger plant spacings. With this integrated growing system, you should be able to continually have an optimal growing conditions. You'll have 95+% germination. You'll have effective weed control. You'll only use 25 to 50% of the water, and you can very easily get 5 to 10 times the traditional production. You can use it vertically to produce food. You can use this system anywhere. If you have rocky soil, on concrete, in soil, wherever, it'll grow. And as I mentioned, on a 12 by 36 foot space, you should be easily able to produce up to 2 tons of food per year with 30 minutes a day of invested time. So you ready? Let's go on the journey. Here we go. Choices. I have chosen among the choices to cover all of the principles. Now, it will be quite involved because I'm afraid the ones I leave out may be the ones you need. So I'm going to cover them all, and you can figure out which ones you need to leave off. You can choose the ones to multiply your production. I know when I was farm manager over in North Carolina, one of the ladies that was growing with me came up to me and she said, "Mr. Kennedy, you need to do a disclaimer. I went to Lowe's and bought a rose bush, and I planted it, and I'm only using 4 of the things that you talked about, and I'm having to pick my roses from a stepladder. You need to do a disclaimer so you can get some good growth. One of the things that is important to me is time efficiency. We're only given 24 hours a day, and I have plenty to do, so I want to use my time efficiently. I want to produce the highest quality body fuel that will help me reduce, eliminate, or prevent most lifestyle disease. So I want the maximum nutrient production in the available time and space, and that's where we're headed. Elaine Ingham says it's important to view the soil food web as a complex whole system. And you can look at in the picture on the left and you can see those white hair-like things through the soil. You can see down in the root zone of the corn on the right. The corn roots, all of it go together to make up that whole system. Real food contains maximum biological vitality, allowing it to reach its full DNA potential. Maximum nutrition, maximum production, and a healthy immune system which helps with disease and insect resistance. We have a real blessing at our fingertips. I don't know how many kernels of corn. Do you know how many kernels of corn are on the average year? I'm told that between 400 and 600, let's say 500 on average. What does it take to get that ear of corn and those 500 kernels? It takes one kernel. I don't know of anything else that provides a return like that. Plus you get exercise and sunshine and fresh air. The optimal growing conditions, optimizing soil, light, humidity, and fertilizer and minerals as nutrients, and optimizing the temperature so your plants grow well. Optimal plant growth comes from foundational, are the major and minor minerals, the trace elements which provide for our human health, humus and soil biology which extract the minerals from the soil and make them available in a water-based substance for the plant to use, and the soil energy. Optimal soil contains 95% organic elements. 4% are major minerals: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those three, and they are in parts per thousand. 1% minor minerals, 25 of minor minerals, and they are measured in parts per million, and 0.1% trace elements. Our body contains 84, and they are measured in parts per billion. So, the plant needs spacing so that the mature leaves touch the leaves of the next plant. That if you use beds, and there are times when you would use beds, which would be if you're planting on concrete or very poor soil, you may want to. I tend to like to use beds because they'll dry out and warm up quicker in the spring, but I like to water the aisles. And you just flood those aisles and you bottom water at the same time. And it just tends to work for me, so I like that. Your beds need to be 2 arm lengths of the pickers, not my 2 arm lengths wide. Sunlight, mostly full sunlight, depending on the plant. Row orientation of primarily east to west, depends how much toward the poles we are, but that's the best orientation. We want about half soil, half air, and half water in our soil. We want our minerals. We use humates, which come from soft Linardite, soft brown coal, to pull the minerals out of the soil and put them in an aqueous or water-based solution for the plant to use. Energy and paramagnetism work to make the plant sap pump work efficiently. The more energy, the better it works. Organic matter is comprised basically of spent cellulosic material, stems and leaves and things like that. That acts as a paramagnetic insulator and insulates the electrical charges in the ground. And then the biology outnumbers everything else and helps it all work. We need enough water so that our plants don't wilt, and we want to bottom water so that we don't water the seeds of the weeds into life and have a lot of competition. It's kind of interesting. We don't, in the eastern part of the U.S., use the term so often, but in the West, there is a term known as dust mulch. There's dust that mulches the plants. Temperature, above the ground, it needs to be above freezing up to 95 to 100. Your root zone needs to be kept in the 75 to 80. Once the root temperature goes down below 55, very little plant growth happens. And that's pretty much what makes plants grow. Now that's fairly comprehensive, but it's not too bad. Justus von Liebig, the father of fertilizer, established what is known as the law of the minimum. Unless the soil's in perfect balance, the yield or quality potential of a crop is like a barrel with staves of unequal length. The crop will be limited by the shortest stave of the barrel. Through NPK farming, the trace minerals have been largely leached from the soil. We have not replaced those trace minerals. We've added the major minerals, and the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture studies show that soil minerals have been depleted between 16 and 79% during the last 50 years. Years ago, up in Kentucky, there was a farmer, quote, unquote, scientist that decided, rightfully so, that if he mineralized his soil, the plants growing in that soil would have more minerals. And so he began to study it. And what he found, he wrote a little booklet, Mineralization. Will it reach you in time? Will you have those minerals to provide your health? And he bought supermarket spinach, 2 different sets of it, tested it, and on average he was getting 1,100 parts per billion of iodine in the spinach, and he tested his mineralized spinach, and it was getting 640,000 parts per billion for a 58,200% increase. So do you want to eat 582 leaves of spinach, or just one to get the same amount of iodine? That's what it can do for you. And iron was increased 4 times, and the other minerals increased up to 1,000 times. Linus Pauling, the only unshared 2-time winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, said, "You can trace every sickness, every disease, and every ailment to a mineral deficiency." That's not just most, that's every. And that's someone who had studied a lot. Well, in this garden, what sort of seeds are we going to use? I would choose to use non-genetically modified, because genetically modified, 80% of our wheat, corn, and canola are genetically modified. What that means to us is not only do we have the DNA remains, fragments in there, which we know causes challenge from a DNA standpoint, and incidentally, the allergic the allergies to soybeans increased 50% once genetically modified soybeans were in widespread use. We now know that the glyphosate acts on the intestinal tract, can cause the biology in the intestinal tract to go from beneficial biology to a pathogenic biology, otherwise known as Clostridium difficile, or C. diff in today's health care. 95% of soybeans are genetically modified. So if the genetic modification isn't harmful, then the glyphosate can perforate the intestinal tract and allow some of those food remnants to go into the interstitial space, and the body says, oh, that's a foreign body, that's genetically, oh, we need to protect against that, and it will mount a defense known as an autoimmune disease or a sensitivity, that asthma is one of those, etc. And we have challenges there. So I would tend to use organic seeds. For sprouting, we know that the germ of the organic seed is larger than the germ of a genetically modified seed. Whether we use it for direct seeding, for sprouting, or for transplant, I would use organic, non-genetically modified seed. One of the challenges we're facing right now with seeds is many of the seeds come from companies that hold the patents to the chemicals. And so we need to be real careful what we're getting. Do we use hybrid or heirloom seed? Now, hybrid seed has been developed primarily for storage, handling, and appearance. Let me see, where's taste? Huh? Oh, the heirloom seed has been selected for taste and nutrient density. In fact, if you want tomatoes that you have a hard time keeping, grow Mr. Stripey's. And then when the company comes, hide them in the cupboard, because when they leave, you won't have any, because they'll eat them all. But heirloom seed has been selected for taste and nutrient density. That's what I want. So I'm going to go for heirloom seed. Heirloom seed can also be saved. But understand that you need to know how to save the seed, because if you don't know how to save it, what plants to select and how to go about it, it may well be unproductive within 5 years if you don't know what you're doing. But I would encourage you to do that. The first thing we need to decide is what we're going to eat. Because there's no sense in growing stuff for everybody else and you starving. That's why you do it. But in every one of our microclimates, we have a growing zone. In that growing zone, there are a variety of microclimates created by all sorts of different things. There are some areas that are cooler and wetter. They have greater adaptability and more inputs. So we tend, if we want to grow for sustenance, to grow right down the middle of the growing zone. And then we think, oh, now wait a minute. I do like cantaloupes, and I do like that kind. And so we begin to get out of that sustenance area into our likes. You know, pinto beans and cornbread are great if that's all you got, but sometimes it's better to have some tomatoes and potatoes and maybe, yeah, you get my drift. But I would suggest to you The other side of the thing is the hotter, drier. It will again impact what you can grow, but as we look forward, I think the thing we're promised weather-wise is that we will have change. I don't think we will have weather the same as we have always had. There will be more and more change and variability in the weather. And so when that happens, we're going to have to go back into the center of that growing zone and grow, maybe as our ancestors did the three sisters: corn, beans, pumpkins. You know, they did just fine on that, and we may have to rely on it as well. There is a list of aggregate nutrient density that tells you what the concentration of nutrients per calorie is in the various foods that we eat. Now, I'm not discouraging a variety of foods. The more color, the better in your variety. No worries about that. But I have red Russian kale. I have collards that have survived 2 winters outside, no covering or protection whatsoever, and we picked them all through those 2 winters, the first summer and the second summer, and they shot seed heads at the end of the second summer, and I collected all the seeds because those are the ones I want. You don't want to have to do a whole lot with them. 2 kale and collards, which are the top. We can add watercress, and there are various others that you need to be aware of, but mostly the greens have more nutrients. We want to use biological agriculture, a continuously optimal supply of bioavailable nutrients and growing conditions so that plant can really do what it's set out to do. A family, 12 by 18 foot space, 2 of those, or 4 5 by 30. That'd be 20 by 30. And you plant those varieties that you want to eat. Don't plant something you don't want to eat. If you don't like rutabagas don't plant it. Don't do it. Commercial, if you're going to do commercial production, 30 by 100. The thing of it is, don't overplant. Most people plant and then they can't keep up with it. Plant something that you can keep up with, keep the weeds out of, and pick and eat. 10 5 by 30, and you're going to plant varieties to sell. As you think about your purpose and size, you want to think about where you're going to get water from. If you're going to use any electricity, where it's going to come from. If you're growing outside of the summer season, where are you going to get heat from? How can you get that root temperature up so the plants will actually grow? And the orientation and exposure to the sun. During the summer, that's not as critical. But when the sun starts going down earlier and getting up later, it's going to be more and more critical, the amount of sunlight that you do have. There are 3 types. There's warm weather that produce fruit, tomatoes, corn, peppers. There are the medium cold tolerant plants that produce heads and flowers, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. And then there are the cold tolerant that produce roots and leaves, parsnips, carrots, onions, rutabagas, beets. Those are the things that we're going to think about as we consider year-round production. But there's one source of food that's an excellent source that we haven't talked about, and that is sprouts. There's more nutrient density in a sprout than there is in the produce that comes from that plant. They have high protein, enzyme, vitamins, and minerals in them. Their nutrient density is highest 5 to 6 days after germination, just after they've just sprouted. Broccoli sprouts contain up to 5,000% more of the sulforaphane than fresh broccoli from the store, and the sulforaphane are the things that protect us from cancer in broccoli. Vitamins, proteins, enzymes, and minerals multiply from 300 to 1,200% in sprouts. You can use a fancy sprouting tray. You can use a quart jar with mesh on the top. There are a number of resources. Steve Merowitz is known as the Sprout Man. He wrote a number of books, including The Miracle Food. Eatsprouts.com is a good resource. Sprouting Seeds, sprouting.com. And I cheat a little bit. I use kelp or seaweed extract. They have trace minerals in them, and I figure if I need trace minerals, I'm going to get them from sprouts as well as the other things that I eat. So I tend to use kelp or seaweed extract as a rinse in my water when I wash my sprouts. So, are we going to have junk food or processed food? And then organic can contain 80 to 100% of our needed requirements. Whole food, 400%. Cooking reduces nutrients 80% and destroys the enzymes. Mineralized food will have from 4 to 582 times the nutrients. Dehydrated below 104 degrees will leave the enzymes intact. Bioactive in kraut or raw will increase the nutrition, and the living sprouts, biogenic, or the pre-digested tempeh or miso will have more nutrition. Preparation and storage, fresh and ripe. I like the varieties of food. I like to know what I have versus what I don't have. Next session, we're going to be talking about production multipliers, how to boost your production up to 30 times what other production is. There are a number of methods and a number of materials, and we're going to talk about each.